Hello. Welcome to my 31st October. I'm Lucky27, and this is a series of stories I have often told about my life. Today's story is entitled, The Day That Changed My Life. This February of 2024, is the 24-year anniversary of when I met my husband, so I thought this story would be an appropriate story to tell. My husband and I met when we were both 15 years old. I was a sophomore in high school, and he was a freshman in junior high, because in the state we lived in, 9th grade was still considered junior high. He is only a month and a half younger than me, but he missed the cutoff to be in my grade since he was born after the school year ended. They also were building a new high school in our area, and he ended up attending that high school when it opened. Needless to say, we would probably have never met had it not been for my then boyfriend. On a side note, due to a series of unforeseen events, I ended up graduating a year earlier than I was supposed to. So technically, I graduated 2 years before my husband. Anyways, to say that I was a bit out of my then boyfriend's league wouldn't have been too far of a stretch. I have always made friends on the basis of if the person and I were compatible, not what they had to offer me. I took in anyone who mixed well with my brain and my sense of humor. This means I had a wide range of friends, from the guy who drew and wrote poetry in his own blood to male cheerleaders and young felons. I also try to be easy to talk to, so I am usually the group counselor. My boyfriend at the time was very sweet. Puberty hadn't been nice to him, but he wasn't ugly. He was kind, gentle, caring, and could hold a conversation. He was interested in things like anime, LARPing, Magic the Gathering, D&D, video games, and so on. I grew up with an original female gamer. My mom, though we were very, very poor for most of my early years, always found a way to get her hands on used Nintendo, Game Gear, Game Boy, and Super Nintendo games and consoles for us. Her fifth husband was deep in the LARPing scene as well as D&D. We would go to Ren fairs, and even in different states, his costume, which was his D&D character, would get recognized by people at the fairs, and we would get special treatment. So my boyfriend's likes were not outside of my knowledge base. So just because I wasn't physically attracted to him didn't mean I didn't enjoy spending time with him. He had told me a few times about this friend of his that he was very attached to. They enjoyed many of the same things, and he told me that this friend would come over. They would play games, watch anime, spar, and the friend would even clean his house and make him food, and they used to sneak out at night and take walks in the woods together. Now, you're probably thinking the same thing I did, which was that this sounded like a bromance, and I was not interested in getting in the way of that, nor was I looking forward to meeting this guy. He also has one of those names that you don't really hear that much anymore, and it gives you the impression of a guy with glasses, a pocket protector, clothes that don't necessarily fit correctly, greasy hair, and big teeth. My husband had much the same impression of me when my boyfriend would tell him how smart I was, or how pretty I was, or how funny I was, but he was sure I was just a female version of my boyfriend, much like I thought he was just another version of my boyfriend. And boy, were we both wrong. On the day I met my husband, I was sitting in my boyfriend's room, trying not to anger the creatures I was sure were living underneath the piles of clothes on my boyfriend's floor, when there was a knock on the door. My boyfriend shot up from his computer chair and exclaimed, "He's here!" then bolted out of the room to answer the door. I was unaware that my boyfriend had invited anyone over, so I stayed put. I heard and felt my husband before I ever saw him. He has this deep voice that reverberates through you as he's talking. It's calming and threatening at the same time, and his energy is very large. I have been told that some people are intimidated by his aura, but I've never felt that way. It can, however, take up a large amount of space. I remember sitting up straighter when I felt him coming down the hall. I could hear him talking, but I couldn't tell what they were talking about because my husband doesn't like opening his mouth very wide to talk. He was raised to talk quietly, and he doesn't like his teeth. This is why in the beginning of our relationship, I used to call him Mumble. So they walked in, and my boyfriend introduced us while beaming proudly, and I was not prepared for what was in front of me. This boy was over 6 feet tall. His sandy blonde hair was covered by a sage green ball cap that was on backwards. He had large eyes that were the brightest blue I had ever seen, a large nose, and the reddest, most luscious, full lips I had ever seen on a boy. He was thin, but lean, and I could tell that he was in shape. I honestly started thinking about Greek statues and Italian paintings to try and justify what exactly I was looking at. I hadn't ever seen a 15-year-old boy that looked like him. I remember that I spoke to God, just in that moment, and let him know that I approved of this work. Good job, God, I remember thinking. I was a late bloomer when it came to sexual thought or instinct, but he may have been the first person that made me understand all those romance novels that my mother tried to get me to read for years, but at that point, they made no sense to me. My next thought was, how? How are these two friends? My husband was very different from many of the other friends my boyfriend had, and I was slightly taken aback. But then they started talking about 32-sided die, and I understood. He didn't say more than maybe 6 words to me the entire time we were all hanging out, but I liked having him around. Now, according to my husband, he had much the same trepidation on meeting me as I did on meeting him. He figured I would be, like I said earlier, a female version of my boyfriend. He was not expecting someone like me to be dating his friend. My husband has a much higher opinion of me than I do, especially when I was 15. I understand now much better than I did then why my boyfriend used to paw at me or grab hold of me, especially when we were in public. I didn't understand that to many of the onlookers, I perhaps was a bit out of his league. But my husband came to much the same conclusion as those others had. He thought I was too beautiful to be with his friend. But it wasn't for him to say. I think he thought there was something wrong with me if I was with his friend. Needless to say, we had an interesting start. I dated that particular boyfriend for just a few weeks shy of a year and had met my husband about 2 weeks into that relationship. He also became a part of our relationship, as strange as it sounds, but I promise it's not how it sounds. What I mean is that during our relationship, my husband was around a lot at my request. I hate being touched. It makes me physically ill when people put their hands on me and leave them there. My then boyfriend was very touchy and kissy with me, and I hated it. I understood that this was supposed to be normal teenage behavior to hold hands and kiss, so I put up with it. But it got to a point where I really didn't want to deal with his clinginess. So when he would call me up and ask if we could hang out, I would ask him if his friend, my husband, could hang out with us. He usually behaved himself when my husband was around. My boyfriend also got harder to hold conversations with because it would usually come back to how much he loved me. But my husband was a great conversationalist and would even help me cook food sometimes. I was sad when my boyfriend and I broke up, and I could no longer spend time with my husband. My family ended up moving to another state, again, about 6 or 7 months after the breakup, but I did keep up contact with that particular group of friends. I found out later that my husband had pretty much orchestrated the whole breakup, and had I not moved away, he was working up to shooting his shot with me. But things didn't work out that way. We still talked every so often over the next 6 years. I stayed single, he got engaged on and off again to this young lady that really didn't treat him right. But I would ask our friends how he was doing, and we'd email or message each other from time to time. I honestly thought that that ship had sailed, though fate, it seemed, was not finished with us yet. But that's another story. So that's how I met my husband. And before you ask, yes, he and my ex are still friends. He was one of our biggest supporters when we did finally get together, and was one of the first to congratulate us when we got married. No hard feelings there. I don't talk to him because we really don't have that much to say to one another, but I do wish him all the best and hope that he does find peace in his life. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the journey with me. I'm not sure how often I'll be posting something here, so leave a like, hit the subscribe button, and the bell, so you get updated when I do post. If you have questions or you want to know more about something I've said, please leave a comment and maybe I'll make a video explanation on the subject. But please be polite and courteous with the comments. My feelings don't get hurt, but the world has enough hate and judgment in it. It doesn't need yours on this video. If you think you know who I am, please don't leave a comment guessing my identity. Just send an email to the address in the description box. Thanks, and I'll see you when I see you.